Welcome to my garden! Over the years, I've learnt so many tips that help to make my garden lower maintenance. So join me on today's tour as I share with you a few of the things I've learnt, and we'll harvest a few goodies too. I wanted to start today's sticky beak around the garden with a look at a few of the things I'm especially pleased with so far. The green fingered and thumbed triumphs that have got my growing season off to a good start. One of the winners this season has got to be my spinach. These were started off into plug trays and then planted outside, initially under covers. They've yielded so many of their rich, almost opulent leaves. They just kept pumping them out, and so long as I've kept picking them, they kept on producing. They've finally started to bolt, which means they're about to flower, and that really slows down production. However, I've still been harvesting the flowers here because they don't have any of the bitterness that you sometimes get with other crops like, say, lettuce. And these, whizzed up into a smoothie, are absolutely fine. You're still getting your greens. I actually chose a variety that's marketed as slow to bolt, and it really has been slow to bolt. I've had so many harvests, and that's probably my first tip, is to prioritise varieties that are a little bit easier and less fuss. In this case, because they've been more to harvest and I've had more time between sowing and having to pull the plants up. Still, I reckon these guys are about done now, so I'm going to have to dig them up and replant. Another triumph has been these sensational spring cabbages. Just look at them. Now, these were planted into this new raised bed which I set up in the winter using the lasagna technique. Layers of plant material, in this case straw, old crops and leaves, were layered to create the bulk of the filling. Then in early spring I simply capped the whole lot off with a layer of well-rotted manure on top to plant into. Well, the cabbages have absolutely loved it and grown exceptionally strong. I'm so pleased with the result, especially given the cost of this. All the ingredients to make the bed were free except for one barrow load of manure, which cost very little. It's also saves lugging over heavy barrow loads of potting mix because most of it was just light and leftover scraps from around the garden. I will definitely be starting more beds like this in the future, and if you would like to see how this bed was set up, by the way, we did do a video on that and I will pop a link to it down below. Gardeners have to be patient, eternally patient, otherwise we would despair. In the face of setbacks, we must be resilient, pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, sometimes literally, and try again. You may remember when I planted these tomatoes about a month or so ago, I popped fish heads into the bottom of each planting hole. Well, I'm afraid to say they did indeed attract the attention of the local wildlife, but whether it was a badger, a fox, a cat, or indeed Rosie, I'm not sure. As you can see, whatever it was dug holes good and proper and scattered soil everywhere. Luckily, the plants themselves were fine, if a little dog-eared. Anyway, as you can see, they're growing really well, and I'm very happy with that, and we got a lovely understory of marigolds which is going to attract the pest predators. I have had some fantastic comments, however, about the fish heads, and that's to dust them with garden lime before putting them into the planting hole, because apparently that really does help to mask the smell. So I will try that next season. We're always living and learning, aren't we? These are indeterminate tomatoes, and to make everything low maintenance, nice and easy and no fuss, I simply do 3 jobs every time I come through here. I want to be removing the lowest leaves from the tomatoes up to the first truss. I might go a little bit higher later in the summer, and that just improves airflow and stops water splashing back up onto the leaves and encouraging disease. I just come through and do that. It doesn't take a sec, and I just let everything drop back where it falls. And then the other job is to just remove these side shoots here. Anything that's growing in between the leaf and the main stem, just click those off, finger and thumb, and then let them drop to the ground. And finally, I always keep some string in my pocket because these guys need tying in every now and then. So I'll just go through and tie them in. The grass clippings you see on quite a few of my beds here have proved invaluable at shading the soil. We've had a really dry spell. We went almost a month without rain. We've had a bit of rain recently, but the long-term forecast isn't great. So these grass clippings have been an immeasurable help. They've saved precious water through evaporation, and crucially, they've saved me time watering as well. And anything that saves me time and effort, I absolutely love. Mulch is in action, right? I've harvested myself some spinach and some of these lovely cabbage leaves. Let's see if there are any other treats in store, and then we might replant a few of the gaps. Here are some of my first early potatoes, and if you look closely you can see that the flowers are very small, but they are developing. It's a little bit early to harvest them, best to wait till they're properly flowering, but I reckon we could just have a little look and chance our luck and maybe just dig up one plant and see what there is and see if there's anything relatively small for perhaps salads. And yes, there is. Look at these beauties. They are on the small side, so I'll let the rest grow on, but there's something here. And these will be lovely and fresh. Ooh. Let's pull up one of these rather stunning heads of lettuces. Just look at that, wowzers. That is the size of a baby's head, I reckon. Lots of nutrient-dense leaves in there. Let's add that to the basket too. And then some garlic. These have flopped over, so I reckon they're pretty much good to go. Let's dig one up and have a look. There we go, that's a pretty good bulb. Now these have got a bit of rust on, which is pretty normal, so I'll just take a few of them out here for our harvest basket and then maybe leave the others to take later in the week. And then in between here are some carrots I sowed earlier to make the most of the space, because these garlic will be out shortly, but they're a little bit crowded, so as it's a still calm day, I'm just gonna remove a few of the excess seedlings to leave them kind of a centimetre or half an inch apart. And then to finish, to knock back the smell in case there are any carrot flies about, I'll just give them a good soaking to knock that smell back. I do love the smell of roses and such like, but to be honest with you, the smell of fresh garlic is probably my favourite smell in the garden. While we're here actually, I'm just looking at these fava or broad beans, and there are some pods developing now, which is great. We've enjoyed the flowers, now we've got the pods. But one thing about keeping the garden lower maintenance is to try and preempt problems. In this case, I'm just pinching off the tops of the plants, just the top bit like that, and that's often where the black bean aphid congregates. So by nipping those out, it just means there's slightly less chance of them congregating, though they tend to inevitably anyway. But those ladybugs or ladybirds will come along soon to take care of that. I really, really love broad beans. The inside of the pod is lovely and furry and silky, and they nestle in there. And when this is harvested and finished, what I will do is I will just cut everything to the ground and leave the roots where they are and plant in between them. And that's because beans will fix nitrogen at their roots, and while most of it will have been used in the plant's growth, some might remain. So I may as well just leave it in the soil in case, and that'll help with the next crop. Look at this branch here of these gooseberries. You turn your back and then they're suddenly ready. Now the gooseberry bush, for me, is probably the most low maintenance fruit you can possibly grow. It's ridiculously abundant, and all it needs is the occasional prune in the winter, which is very straightforward to do. I'll come back for most of these later on, but I'll just take a few now to make a bit of a gooseberry fall this evening, my favourite pudding of all time. It can be hard to think about planting when there's so much to pick, but as spaces become available, it makes sense to replant them to keep the bounty coming. Here are some kale plants that I started from seed about 1 or 1.5 months ago, and they look like they're pretty eager to get out of these plug trays, so let's get on and plant them. First, I'm just going to top up the nutrient level with just some of this beautifully, very well rotted manure that I've had delivered at the start of the season. Just spread it out like that, and then we're good to go with the kale plugs. Now I love kale, so aside from the salad onions there, this bed's going to be full of kale, and I'm going to just get on and plant them about 16 inches, that's 40 centimetres apart in both directions. I've got one more row of kale to plant once those salad onions are harvested, so I will pot these on into slightly bigger pots to grow on until there's space for them. And then I'm going to just water them in. And because it's getting on for peak butterfly time now, the last job after this is to add some sort of row cover just to keep them from getting at the crop. So we'll set that up afterwards. I'll be looking at more pest dodging methods in our next video, by the way. As we walk past here, just look at this climbing rose. This must be about 20 foot, like 6-7 meters tall, something like that. It's remarkable, and it's so bright you almost need sunglasses just to walk by it. Absolutely amazing. I brought you down to the compost because we're going to pot on the remainders of those kale, and I've also got some broccoli as well, which is left over from sowing, gosh, 2 or 3 months ago back in the spring. And it's the same as the broccoli that's out there, that's pretty big, and yet they're these little seedlings. They're barely hanging on. But this is quite a clever technique. You can kind of keep things limping on, and as soon as these guys get planted, they'll grow away. So I'm kind of getting a follow-on crop without the hassle of having to re-sow. However, these are going to go where the potatoes are, and that ground is currently occupied, so I'm going to pot them on. So as I said earlier, potting mixes seem to have really rocketed up in price recently. So one way I'm eking out what I buy is to mix in my own mature homemade compost, about 50-50. And this makes the potting mix go obviously twice as far and stretches my budget, which is what I love. This method of keeping some seedlings back to repot as a follow-on crop is a really good low maintenance idea as well. I love that. You can see actually from the purple leaves of these broccoli that they've been really low in nutrients, but now they're potted on into fresh compost, they'll get a new lease of life and green up. And by the time they fill the pots, they'll be good to plant. I'm more determined than ever to make more compost. So much so I've asked my neighbour to just throw his excess clippings and other waste over the garden wall for me to use so I can feed my hungry heap. Trevor gets shot of them and I get more green stuff to deploy around the garden. It's a win-win situation. This is the ultimate low maintenance crop. This potato's just sprouted up in the compost heap, and it's doing really well, so I reckon I'll get some free potatoes here as well with no effort. There are loads of good things still to come. You've seen my outdoor tomatoes. Well, these are my greenhouse tomatoes, and look how much more advanced they are. It's really warm in here, and they're already well on the way to fruits actually, because they're flowering their hearts out, and you can almost see them grow, I swear it. Now, what's so low maintenance in here is this method of support. All I have to do every time I come in is just twirl them round a bit, watch out for those side shoots because these are all indeterminate or finding tomatoes, and just pinch those off as well. And that really is it. There's a side shoot there, for example. Just weave them in a bit and let the wire and the stem kind of marry together, and it keeps everything up like that. So simple. This takes me hardly any time at all to look after. I'm growing 8 different types of tomato here, so I'll get obviously quite a nice variety to pick. Now, one thing I really have noticed is that the cost of plant feeds has also gone up, like the potting mixes. So I've really made the effort this year to grow or harvest more of my own. This is a comfrey feed here. It's another step on the ladder to self-sufficiency, isn't it? We've done a video on the comfrey, which I'll link to below as well. This is my basil collection, by the way. I've got 6 different types here, and I'm looking forward to showing you them in all their glory in a future video. Some of them are really beginning to take off. This is Greek basil, for example. I've planted some in amongst the tomatoes already, and in this warmth, they'll soon bush out. Really looking forward to showing you these. We've been just about everywhere else in the garden, but now it's time to inspect the bean arches, and these are on the cusp of great things. They've almost reached the top, this one at least, and look, they're flowering. So we should be picking beans within a week or possibly 2. But it's down here, come down here. This is what really makes my heart sing, these beautiful poached eggplants. These guys have self-seeded from last year's crop, although I have transplanted them to get them nice and neat along the rows. I've also got calendula there, alyssum, nasturtium, all dotted around here and there. And you could argue that, well, adding flowers to the vegetable garden requires more maintenance, but in fact the opposite is true. These guys attract beneficial bugs like pollinators and pest predators, of course. So in fact, they are saving me maintenance and time by allowing me to grow healthier crops that ultimately produce more food. The corn over here are finally beginning to stretch out, and over here is my squash corner. I've got 3 varieties of squash which will help to give something for the pantry over those cooler winter months. Now I've run out of space in all those beds, so I've gone and planted some of my squash into the grass here, and we all know what that means. It means more beds next season. My take on a forest garden is now entering its 2nd season. We've got the canopy layer, which is the apple tree here, and then the shrub layer is basically currants, and there are some raspberries further back. A couple of the currants have succumbed to last summer's drought, but the rest seem to be really thriving. And then we've got the perennial vegetables and veg garden friendly flowers. I've got the comfrey here, I've got rhubarb, lovely mint over there, and behind me a river of Babington's leek and even some horseradish. Perennial vegetables are the ultimate in low maintenance because you plant them just once and then they come back year after year, and all you have to do is harvest them. That's my kind of crop. This whole forest garden area had an initial problem with bindweed and ivy, but I've slowly got on top of it by putting down these wood chips here on top of an initial carpet of cardboard. I've still got the odd bit of ivy and the odd bit of bindweed coming up, but so I just pass through here every now and then. I just whip out the odd bits I see, and do you know what? I think I'm finally beginning to win the war. Well, those are some of the highlights, so far at least, this growing season. If you like garden tours like this, then do check out this video from last summer. And I'd love to hear about your garden too, so tell me what you are up to down below. I'll catch you next time.